Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third edition of the NewSpace City Brownsville Commercial Space webinar series. This edition, entitled Women in Space, focuses on outstanding women who are, each in their own way, trailblazers in the industry. We are here to get a glimpse of who they are, what they are passionate about, and to listen to what advice they have for people, young or old, male or female, who are aspiring to be a part of the next chapter of human space exploration and development. My name is Frederick Genet, an astrophysicist turned entrepreneur, founder and executive of Expanding Frontiers, a nonprofit 501c organization with the mission to foster the commercial space ecosystem by providing unique training opportunities for students, veterans, and aspiring entrepreneurs who are interested in both space and energy sectors. Please see our website at www.expandingfrontiers.org and follow us on LinkedIn. If you're a high school student wanting to learn more about space entrepreneurship, consider applying to our Space Entrepreneur Summer Academy. Applications are available on our website, again, at www.expandingfrontiers.org. I want to give a quick shout out to the City of Brownsville, the Brownsville Community Improvement Organization, Project Space, and the Federal Economic Development Agency, whose help and support make Expanding Frontiers and programs like these possible. If the human race is going to successfully populate the solar system in a sustainable way, we must be talent agnostic, recognizing that, like any successful enterprise, all skills and all backgrounds are needed in order to get an edge and make the impossible possible. Our panelists today underscore the fact that it takes all kinds to build a village in space. With me today in the virtual studio, in no particular order, we have Anita Gale. Hello, Anita.
Howdy.
An aeroastro engineer, CEO of the National Space Society, and founder of the Space Settlement Design Competition Series. We also have Dr. Patricia Hines. Patricia?
Yes.
Dr. Patricia Hines, with a PhD in Business Administration, is the co-founder of the International Symposium for Personal and Commercial Spaceflight, the first commercial space conference and the first conference founded by a woman, space conference founded by a woman. In her role as the Space Grant Director in New Mexico, she was a critical asset in the establishment of Spaceport America. Also with us, we have Rosina Miller. Hello, Rosina.
Hello.
Rosina Miller, with a master's in physics, is a Jacobs contractor who works in NASA's Orbital Debris Program Office as a research scientist. She is a Brownsville native that helped to develop several programs at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley to promote space exploration and development in the region. Also, we have Dr. Anjali Gupta. Hello, Anjali. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
Dr. Anjali Gupta is a biologist with deep pharmaceutical industry experience, leading the life sciences business development efforts for in-space research and manufacturing at Axiom Space, the first commercial space station. Last but not least, we have Hannah Renz. Hello, Hannah.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon and welcome. Hannah Renz is an aerospace engineer working at Boeing Defense, Space and Security. She also serves on the board of directors of the National Space Society. Well, first off, I want to give a big welcome and thank you to our panel. Thank you for coming and taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today to inspire young minds to think and dream about the future. So, first off, we're going to have each of the panelists talk a little bit about their backgrounds and what inspired them to work in space. Panel members, please feel free to mention any particular experiences or people that helped, guided, or mentored you as you grew to become the person you are today. So first off, Anita, welcome and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. So starting at the beginning, how did I get interested in space? So I grew up in the 1950s. Yes, I am that fossilized. So I remember reading Jules Verne and other science fiction of the day. Asimov, Bradbury were around. There was a comic strip called Buck Rogers back in the 50s and 60s. And I read Buck Rogers. And it was something really, really interesting. Then Sputnik happened in 1957 that said the physics works. And then Yuri Gagarin was launched by the Soviet Union, which proved that people could survive in space. That was a big deal. People didn't know. Then the US responded with the Mercury and Gemini programs leading up to Apollo. And in the middle of that, I was in the 9th grade. And the school district I was in Western Washington State, had a career project. And it was in the course of doing that career project in the 9th grade that I first saw the words aeronautical and engineer right next to each other. And I realized that's what you can do to work in the space program. So it's important to understand that back in the 1960s, when I was in high school, women didn't do engineering. There weren't many. I mean, there were a few trailblazers, but there weren't many. So I knew I had to get really good grades in high school to make it absolutely unquestionable that I belonged in where I was applying to in engineering. And fortunately, the University of Washington in Seattle has a great aeronautics and astronautics program. In fact, they had their 100th anniversary of aeronautics being taught at the University of Washington just a couple of years ago. I think it's 2019. And actually, I was invited to be part of that program. During the time that I was at the University of Washington, so I entered in 1969, a few months after Apollo 11 landed on the moon. I got my bachelor's in 1973 and a master's in 1974. And during the time I was in College of Engineering, University of Washington, engineering enrollment of women passed 1%, which means when I got out into my career with people 40 years into their career, like there weren't any women graduating in those 40 years, I was first woman, only woman, most vintage woman of almost everything I ever did. And actually, occasionally that still happens now. I got my first space industry. Well, actually, I had a summer job at Hughes Aircraft between my senior and graduate years. But after getting my master's, I went to work on the space shuttle program for Rockwell International in Downey, California. Most of my career was on space shuttle, and most of that was in payload and cargo integration. So you have that great big cargo bay, and I was one of the people who planned how to put stuff in there and fly it and get those payloads what they wanted. Boeing bought Rockwell, or our division of Rockwell, in the 1990s. And after space shuttle ended in 2011, I ended up working on Boeing Commercial Crew, and was retired from Boeing Commercial Crew in 2016. And during the course of all of that, even in my college career, I volunteered in technical societies, mostly Society of Women Engineers, American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. 1984, I started a little program called Space Settlement Design Competitions, which has now turned into a global phenomenon with regions all around the world. And also, Rick mentioned, I am now a CEO of the National Space Society. So there's a thumbnail for you.
Awesome! Wow, that is really spectacular. Quite a career, and I, of course, always consider it an honor, Anita, when you join us for any of these programs. And you've always been a big inspiration for myself and for students and everyone that gets a chance to meet you. So thank you so much, Anita. Next up, Patricia Hines. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
I will. But first, Mario, I would like to ask you, who do we have on with us? Just can you tell us a little bit about who's listening to us at the moment? Okay, so I'm talking to you folks that are live on Facebook and live on Zoom. The Zoom people. My background is completely opposite of Anita's. And for many people, they would think Anita and I would never get along because we're so opposite in our backgrounds. So how did I get interested in space? I was out playing because I couldn't stand being inside. And my mother came and got me. And she said, watch this, I want you to see this. And it was the introduction of the Mercury 7 astronauts on the stage. And I looked at them and I saw immediately, I'll never get in there. I'll never be able to do that. And I made an agreement with myself in that moment that I selected myself out. I'll never make it. the exact opposite of what Anita said. Anita came up with, I have a path, I know what I have to do. I want to be in this, and I'm the opposite. So for those of you who don't see yourself in the space industry, could never believe you're in the space industry, or they would not have you, let me just say, if they took me, they'll take you. So do not select yourself out because you don't have, you're not involved with, you don't have the passion. As I said to Rick one time, space is not the priesthood. You don't have to have, you know, you came out of the womb and said, I really need to go to space. I got to do this. That's not the way this really works. There's another part of the industry that I discovered that needs me. When Anita said she read the early books of Buck Rogers, when I started working on what is now Spaceport America, one of the legislators said to me, listen, Pat, no Bucks, no Buck Rogers. You got to figure out how this spaceport's going to make money. I said, okay, that I can do. I know how to make money. And there was no commercial space when I started working in the commercial space industry. There was no commercial crew program at the time. There was no Axiom space at the time. And orbital debris was not a problem. And all the women on this call are going to talk about these things that are part of what we now call the space industry. When Anita and I came up, it was strictly military business. And there's something else that everybody on this call needs to know. That when we were brought up in the old days, they did have wheels, and I did mention television. So anyway, in the old days, space was a military business, and so if you picture a pyramid, at the top of the pyramid was what this very top of the pyramid, the very top 10% of what the public was told, only 10% about what was going on in the space industry. So it's no surprise that people did not understand what the rest of the space industry was about. Now it's a much more public environment, and we need people in the industry. And believe me, we need women in the industry. We don't think differently. We all have a biological brain here. Everybody thinks differently than everybody else. Don't count yourself out. If you have any passion at all in life, in some way, it will be connected to what we're talking about today. And that is, what do humans do when they live and work on the Earth, which is a spaceship of its own kind? And what do we want to do when we live and work off Earth? I was involved in the space settlement design, and Pletty Baker, if you remember Pletty, did you ever know Pletty, Anita?
Yes, I did.
Yep, I was involved in the space settlement design with Pletty. And, you know, Pletty was a physicist. And he decided students need to know what it's like to live and work in space. And I thought, well, I need to know too. So I mentored. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew where the donuts were, but I didn't know much else about what was going on. So for those of you on the phone, on LinkedIn and Facebook, on the phone, believe, if you want to even just look at this more seriously, do it. Amen.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Patricia. And it is always an honor to be with you, to listen to your deep thinking about how we as humans interact with space. And that's always been something I know that's a core of the way you think and the way you push things from sort of design and how we, if we're going to be moving forward into space, have to understand the human condition when doing that. So thank you so much for joining us today. Okie doke. So next up, Rosina Miller. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you to Expanding Frontiers and my hometown of Brownsville for inviting me to be on this panel. From the time that I was old enough to talk, my dad would teach me about the moon and the planets and the stars. As I grew up, our nightly dinner conversations were about the possibility of alien life, the newest episode of Star Trek Next Generation, that's the science fiction I grew up with, and what our space program was doing. In short, I have been, and I always will be, a huge nerd. I attended public school in the Valley, and every year from 3rd grade until I graduated from the Science Academy of South Texas, I competed in regional and state science fairs, usually with an astronomy-related project. As a rising junior, I was one of the first students to participate in a high school astronomy at Texas Southmost College, which is now UTRGV. And about 10 years later after that, I came back to the Valley and I directed and taught that same high school summer academy, which was one of the best and most fulfilling experiences of my life. When I went to undergrad, I had the opportunity to be part of a flagship physics honors program that I had helped create that was at UTV-TSC. I was in the inaugural class and I was one of 5 students. And until my junior year, I was the only Hispanic woman. This program allowed me to do research starting from day 1, year 1. I traveled around the world and I worked with some of the world's largest radio telescopes. And it also helped develop my passion for outreach. My graduating class gave UTV-TSC national recognition among top institutions for granting the most physics degrees to Hispanic scholars that year. And I was one of 2 Hispanic women to graduate in that class. So there's still not very many women in physics or engineering. After graduating, I went on to West Virginia University, where I had a full scholarship and the intent of getting my PhD. While I was there, I established 2 different graduate student groups, the Physics and Astronomy Graduate Student Organization and the Science Policy Organization, both of which were different types of outreach and policy organizations. After I completed my PhD coursework, I decided that academia didn't really suit me, and I decided to pursue my lifelong dream of working for NASA. So I moved to Houston, and I started from zero with an internship at Jacobs. Thankfully, the skills that I had learned through my undergraduate program and through my graduate work enabled to successfully tackle any of the problems that I had been given, or all of the projects that I was given, rather. And upon completion of my internship, I was granted a full-time position with Jacobs, working in the Orbital Debris Program Office. So what's orbital debris? We've mentioned it a couple of times. So in my office, we study human-made space junk. And that's what orbital debris is. It's junk that we have created by putting stuff in orbit. It has been identified as a huge safety risk for human spaceflight, our astronauts that are on ISS, and any robotic missions that we launch into Earth's orbit. And so we study this debris environment, and in order to build models to better predict that environment for the future, so for future missions, and also we work to implement standards to help mitigate future orbital debris. That's what I do and how I got here.
Well, thank you so much, Rosina. And thank you so much for being here. And just let me say that I am so proud of you. I am so proud of your accomplishments and what you continue to do. And especially that as you continue to do this and move through the industry, Brownsville is still your home, and you still come back and you still inspire the next generation. So thank you so much for all of that. And I look forward to continuing to be able to brag about you and to work with you in the future. So
it's my honor and privilege.
Excellent. So next up, Hannah Renz. Hannah, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much. Very happy to be here today. It's been a couple years, so I wish we could be in Brownsville again. I haven't been there since Rockets and Rigs, but miss it. Had a great time as well. So I am actually sitting here today due almost solely in part to one of the other panelists here, Anita Gale. In 2012, I was a freshman in high school and randomly signed up for what I thought was just a bus trip to NASA. I grew up in Iowa and thought, okay, yeah, we're gonna, make the 14, 15, 18 hour trip down, see Johnson Space Center, have a cool weekend, turn around and go right back home. Little did I know, I was signing up for my very first space settlement design competition, where me, never having taken calculus or physics or any advanced math or science of any kind, I was in my first engineering class, absolutely became obsessed with and fell in love with the idea of getting to live in outer space. Whether that was off of Earth, kind of in Leo, like the International Space Station, whether that was on the moon, whether that was on Mars, I didn't care. I knew from that point, I wanted to get off Earth. And I figured the best way to do that was to go pursue an aerospace engineering degree a few years later. So actually last May, I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with my aerospace engineering degree. So any students in COVID, I feel for you. Very, very hard. I only had about a half semester of the virtual learning, but that was plenty for me. It was challenging enough, and I'm very happy that I didn't have to experience anymore, but even more overjoyed that the end is in sight and that we are not getting back to normal necessarily, but getting back to what our new normal is. So I'm an early career engineer. I started back in August as a systems engineer for Boeing, space, defense, and security. So I get to work on the defense side. I don't get to talk a lot about what I do, but I have a really cool job and I get to crawl around on airplanes all day. But to keep the passion for space alive, I serve on a few technical committees. So I recently joined the AIAA Space Colonization Technical Committee, and I also get to serve on the National Space Society Board of Directors and the Space Settlement Advocacy Committee. And that work with the National Space Society has allowed me to actually, I'm in the process of publishing my first academic paper. So last summer, instead of doing an internship, I contracted with the National Space Society and set out to document and read every paper ever published on space settlement, which, as we learned, there were far more than we were anticipating. We were overjoyed. We're talking hundreds of papers that I ended up reading and ended up writing about the scientific feasibility of space settlement and kind of setting a baseline, a survey of where our technology is right now, what we've documented, and what gaps we still have in our knowledge and where we need to go. Oh, and I still get to volunteer with the Space Settlement Design Competitions, family of competitions. I don't think I've missed a year of volunteering on and off since 2012, either being a student or a volunteer. So that is my absolute passion, and I will continue to give back to that organization for as long as I possibly can, since it is responsible for why I'm here today.
Yippee.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hannah, for that. And of course, we're looking forward to seeing you back down in Brownsville, perhaps at one of the space settlement design tournaments in the near future. So next, we have Anjali Gupta. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
I am very excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So my background is a little bit different compared to my esteemed panelists. I began my career in pharma at companies like Roche Pharmaceuticals and Pfizer. Yes, the same company that made your COVID vaccine, or for some of you. There, I conducted early stage drug discovery research as an electrophysiologist and developed assays for high throughput drug screening and established novel protocols for small molecule safety pharmacology assessments. And then sometime after that, I moved into digital health clinical trials. And then although my passion for space dates back to about 1980, when I first discovered Lost in Space, my transition into space began about 7 years ago, almost to the day. May 22nd, 2014, I was standing in line right behind Jill Charter, Dr. Jill Charter. We were at the same conference hosted by the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Imagination. I thanked her for her talk and expressed my passion for space and asked her for advice on how to transition into space. She said, be persistent, apply for NASA fellowships, and attend a lot of space meetings. And that's exactly what I did. So she was certainly an inspiration. And the other person who's been a huge inspiration in the more recent past is Dr. Pat Hines, who's right here on this panel. I met Dr. Hines a couple of years ago at the ISS National R&D meeting, and there we connected, and she served as more of a mentor. She invited me to attend the ISPCS meeting, and then that just launched one thing after another, and eventually I was recruited to Axiom Space, and I am there now. I'm in a business development role, enabling life science capabilities in space for research and manufacturing on orbit. And happy to be here.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. We're so glad to have you, and looking forward to the discussions. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for giving us, for sharing and for giving a little bit of a background and why, how we all got into space. And I guess the neat thing that I guess everyone is probably noticing, and as Patricia had pointed out early on, is that we all came to it in very different ways. So it is really, it's an important point to underscore. So now we're going to move on to sort of the question and answer session for our panel. The Expanding Frontiers team, which in and of itself is a diverse group of young professionals who grew up in South Texas, created a bank of questions for our panelists. Then each of the panelists reviewed the list and chose a set of 5. We're going to start with these questions. And then the audience, as you're listening in, please feel free to text in some questions for the panel. So we're going to start with some questions around the space industry itself. Many of us know about space exploration and development through science fiction, books, or movies. This includes thought-provoking works such as 2001: A Space Odyssey or A Stranger in a Strange Land, as well as great space operas like Star Trek, Star Wars, or more recently, The Expanse, all with varying degrees of realism. And perhaps in another panel, we may have a discussion about how realistic each and every one of these particular space operas and science fiction works are. But the real thing is, in the end, it's all science fiction. Or is it? This leads us to our first question. And this one is for all the panelists. And the question is, what are some common misconceptions that individuals have about the space industry? And how can we work to change those misconceptions? Anita.
Okay, I would start with a misconception that people have, the general public, is that space doesn't matter to them. People don't realize that what makes the map function work on your phone is a satellite. Actually, it's a network of satellites that make the functionality work on your phone. When I was talking with someone in India this morning, what enables that to happen is satellites. The benefits of space are all around us in our civilized life, and people don't realize that. Another misconception is that what the space industry is now, or what is going on now in space, is what it will continue to be. And I think there's another question where we'll get a little bit more into this, but we really, to break these misconceptions, we really need to make news about what is happening in space and what is going to happen in space and what can happen in space, and how the things that people can do in space can ultimately benefit all of humanity and make a difference for people everywhere.
Oh, fantastic point. Fantastic point. Patricia.
Again, a different perspective. And I talked with you a bit about this, Rick. Curiosity is something we all have, curiosity. And some people are more curious than others. Curiosity is a life force. And when I get into a room of people who don't know about space, I ask the question, Is anybody curious about anything related to space? Anything far away? Because when you want to start a dialogue with, and there may be people who are listening now that realize I am curious about one thing. And if you are, you can either go and find out about it yourself or do what you're hearing is happening here. People asked when they found somebody who knew about space, they asked their question. I've discovered over time that misconceptions about space are truly unbelievable. I heard last night on a CNN program that this question, you know, I kind of think space is kind of a hoax. How come if I can see the moon from here, how come I can't see California from here? Holy mackerel. Now, some people would say I'm not obliged to answer questions like that. I would rather have my skin scraped off with a fork than try to convince that person that space is not a hoax. But we can all take a deep breath and be curious about what makes you ask that question. What makes you ask that question? Where was the last city that you traveled to? Where was the last city you traveled to? And try and get them to be grounded in what they know that they know. When was the last time you took an airplane trip? And start from there. So for those of us who have had to deal with misconceptions about space, be curious and do what you can. If I could have jumped through the TV, which could come someday. You did watch Star Trek, we can do things. At the moment, I thought of the answer to that, and that's how I would deal with that. So there's misconceptions about space, and we all know that we have enough curiosity in our lives to sustain us for a long time. That's my answer. And thank you, Rick, for doing this, by the way.
Most welcome. Thank you, Patricia. And I love the, there's a reason why I'm having Anita and you talk next to each other, because I know we're going to get opposing views from that. So it's fantastic. So, Anjali.
Yeah, so some of the misconceptions that I hear pretty frequently on a daily or weekly basis is that, you know, space is hard, it's inaccessible, it's prohibitively expensive. Perhaps it's temporary and it's only for government work or research. But, you know, it's, so I want to quote this from Larry Page that I heard. It's a quote that I heard a while back. Good ideas are always crazy until they're not. So imagine, you know, Netflix. I'm thinking Netflix back in, I think it was around 2000 or 1999. Imagine streaming media continuously on a laptop or a computer. That was unheard of, right? Blockbuster was all the rage. And now we're Zooming on a daily basis. On Zoom or Teams, 8 hours, 9 hours a day. So that crazy idea was crazy until it's not. So if you think about space as an innovation platform, or microgravity as an innovation platform. And so what crazy ideas can you think of that utilize the microgravity as a platform, and that one day they will not be crazy, they will be routine, they will be part of our daily lives on Earth, and then beyond Earth into deep space exploration. So those are some misconceptions and how we might change them. Just keep an open mind.
Very, very thoughtful. Thank you. Thank you, Anjali, for that. Let's see. Next up, Rosina.
Sorry, had to unmute. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have that I learned a lot about when I started working at NASA was you don't have to be a physicist or an engineer or a computer scientist to be a part of the space industry. And Patricia talked about this, and Anjali also mentioned it. I have friends at NASA who were English majors, who help write standards that define how we go into space, what the astronauts can and can't do, people with biology backgrounds, people with art backgrounds, education backgrounds. We need that diversity of backgrounds to really make the space industry successful. And, to accomplish those great ideas that seem crazy.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Rosina. And Hannah.
I'm disappointed that there are so many misconceptions that I still have something to talk about after all of the fantastic ones that have been listed. One of the ones that I run into more frequently, unfortunately, and even throughout my college experience, was a lack of exposure and a lack of knowledge about all of the incredible things that the NewSpace market is doing. That it's not just the same big players, it's not just NASA, it's not just Boeing and Lockheed and the usual suspects. Now SpaceX is starting to get a lot more recognition and a lot more attention, but it doesn't just stop there. There are dozens and dozens of companies with more popping up every single day, accomplishing and working together to go above and beyond our wildest dreams and actually create these communities and allow us to accomplish all of the crazy things that we dream of and talk about and have been working for decades. And I think the biggest way to change that misconception is to go do it, to go accomplish and put our mark down on all of the wild, crazy things that we're doing. And I think that is the path forward. I would love to see more and more of NewSpace. It's incredible how it's expanded just in the last 5 years. And I cannot wait to see where the next 5 years go.
Fantastic. Same here. Definitely can't wait to see it. But I think the important message here is that there's several important messages, right? That it takes all kinds. A common misconception, of course, is that the physicist, engineer, that's all you have to be. But obviously, in this panel, we show that that is definitely not the case. And also messaging. I think that's another thing, is just getting the word out to what NewSpace is, what space exploration and development can be for all of us. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the insights there. Moving along, as CEO of the National Space Society and a member of the NSS for several years, Anita Gill constantly reviews the space energy and thinks about its future. So this one, I'm just going to throw right at Anita to tell us about how has the space industry changed in the last 5 years, and what do you think is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
So what I have seen in the space industry and looking at it from what we call in National Space Society, the Space Settlement Technical Community, and also in American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, which is AIAA, there's a Space Settlement Technical Community. We are the folks who've been thinking about living in space for a long time and are trying to make it happen. I'm seeing a shift in attitudes in, let's call it, the conventional space industry. Actually, what we referred to it as is the giggle factor about living in space is gone. There was a giggle factor, we were kind of actually, Space Colonization Technical Committee in AIAA was called the Unicorn Committee, like, it's not gonna happen. Now there's an attitude that, living in space is going to happen. There's acknowledgement that people will live in space. There's a change in the vocabulary that we're seeing in conferences and in industry. We're seeing the word infrastructure as in space industry. We're hearing cislunar economy. We're hearing a consortium of companies working together. We're hearing NASA taking on a role as a customer rather than a launch provider. And how I predict this is going to be changing is following up on what Hannah said, is we need to start making news about what is going on in the space industry, back in that space settlement technical community. What are we looking at? So when we actually have access to the moon, when we land people on moon and establish the infrastructure for going down to the lunar surface and coming back, there are companies, Hannah knows some of the folks, there are people right now who are working on looking at the economics and chemistry of processing lunar materials to make commodities in space. We're talking air and water and everything you need to live in space from lunar materials, plus products that we can sell and drive that economy. So what I see happening in the next, it may not be 5 to 10 years, but as soon as we have access to those lunar materials, literally we're going to have business will expand and humanity, but with any luck, we'll have a new product from lunar materials. That's one of those things like this that people can't live without. That can only be made on the moon of lunar materials. And one of the things that's going to be a signal that this is happening is when property rights are settled in space. The lawyers, the space lawyers, have been arguing about property rights for 40 years that I know of, and haven't really come to any resolution. And honestly, how I think it's going to work is a company is going to plop itself down on the moon, stake a claim, say this is mine, put up a manufacturing plant, start making and selling stuff. And then there's some international laws about what's it called? Basically establishing a practice is what it would be in a non-legal terms. Look for that. Cross fingers.
Cross fingers and hope. Well, I guess hope that it happens sooner rather than later. Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you, Anita. Okay, so that's now looking at the industry, getting an idea of where we are, what some of the misconceptions are. Now I want to start to get into some of what are the challenges in the industry. So a good question that comes up, and when they teach entrepreneurs about customer discovery, and you start talking to people and you start trying to understand what are the issues, because as an entrepreneur you're trying to develop things to make change. This type of this philosophy, this strategy can be used in all areas when you're trying to understand what are the challenges and how to enact change. So the question I'm going to ask the entire panel is, if you could have a magic wand and solve any problem or challenge in the space industry, what would you want to solve? And now let's start with Rosina.
Well, my answer means I'd be out of a job, but orbital debris. Because unfortunately, orbital debris is not a stagnant problem. It is a growing problem. And every time we put more stuff in space, we create more orbital debris. And we're putting more and more things in space. All of the time, every month, we put more things in space. And if you've ever seen WALL-E, and there's the scene when they leave the Earth because they've found the plant and they're taking it back to the humans, and they crash through all the satellites that have completely covered the Earth. I mean, Earth's orbit basically looks like that, just with tiny, tiny particles. And the sad truth is those tiny particles pose a danger to basically every space mission. And so if we want to go to the moon, if we want to put in more space stations in Earth's orbit, we got to solve that problem.
Do you see something that, or what would need to change to make people more aware of that, or what has to happen to help move that challenge?
I mean, awareness is a big part of it. Unfortunately, these tiny particles are traveling at 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 kilometers per second. And so even if you have paint flecks, that come off of the rocket bodies, the rocket body comes back, but these paint flecks get left behind. My office used to look at the windows from the space shuttles that had chips in it from paint flecks. And these are the space shuttles, right? So we gotta, my office doesn't do this, but we have to figure out a way to start doing active debris removal. And that, so raising awareness so we get the money so we can start doing that.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you, Rosina, for that.
Mhm.
Next up, Hannah, you have your magic wand. What are you going to change?
I am actually going to shift the focus of every single space project that's being designed right now and being designed in the future to focus not on just design to accomplish the mission, but design to account for maintenance, repair, and overhaul so that we make anything that we can launch, anything that we bring into space last as long as possible and be able to be reused, recycled, and just make it last as long as possible, instead of just having the attitude of, oh, we're going to bring this thing to the moon and it's just going to serve us for 30 days and then it's going to be done. We can just leave it and walk away. We have to get away from that attitude and instead think, okay, after this 30-day mission, what can we do with this? What can we do with what we leave behind? How can we reuse it, reutilize it, and kind of so many of our space missions have, and especially exploration missions, have had that attitude and it has served us well. But if we're really going to transition into actually settling and actually living in space long term, we have to take advantage of every single resource like that we have.
Excellent. That's a good one, Rick. I love it, Hannah. Way to go.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Hannah. So, Anjali, you have your magic wand.
Yes. So I'm going to come from a life sciences perspective. If humans are going to be able to live in space for long terms, we need to understand and address those risks of living long term in space. Right now, there are numerous experiments that have been conducted over the last 20 years on the ISS. These are excellent experiments. However, it's a complex process. Experiments take time. Reproducibility is a challenge. So if I had this magic wand, I would want to understand the secrets of not having microgravity as part of that equation. So without having that force of gravity, understanding biological sciences, what are the changes that occur, and then being able to leverage those to develop the countermeasures. And also using not only those countermeasures, but those secrets to develop processes and potentially technologies or products that can be applied to space. So using that microgravity environment to then develop those technologies that translate to the ground and improve or change lives. So it's really understanding the secrets of the microgravity or the effects of microgravity with that magic wand.
I'm going to add one extra question to you, because this is a very interesting area. Do you see something that's coming down the line that requires microgravity in order to create, as Anita pointed out, something like a cell phone that everyone's going to need or something? Is there something on the horizon that you
Absolutely.
can see?
There are quite a few in the biological realm. So there have been numerous experiments done with protein crystallization. It's been shown very conclusively that protein crystals grow much better in space. There are some hard to grow crystals where they grow larger so that you can bring them back down and conduct X-ray diffraction. Why is that important? From a drug discovery background, typically you have a molecule that fits against a protein. If you know the structure of the protein, the biochemistry of the protein, then a medicinal chemist can create a more perfect lock and key model. PCG in space allows for that. Another example is layer by layer manufacturing. So there's actually a company called Lambda Vision, and they are utilizing, or they're testing these parameters right now to be able to print or layer their retinal implants in space, because you don't, in this microgravity environment, you don't have sedimentation, you don't have those conductive currents. And so now that product has fewer defects, it's more perfect. So if this is something that you're going to be bringing back down to earth and putting in a person's eye, you want to have the most perfect product. So those are two examples.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Patricia, I hand you the magic wand. What are you going to change?
Well, I have a magic wand. We all have this magic wand. It's passion. When you have passion, you're invincible. You have to watch it. But you know, when you truly believe, when you know that you know, this has to happen. That's my magic wand. And when I access that passion that I have, passion is catching. Other people get it. Other people feel it, see it. Just like, you know, if you have anger in a crowd, you can see it grows exponentially. You can see it catches. Passion is catching too. So we all have it. What are you going to do with yours? And so one of the things that I understand I have to do to balance my passion is to develop a superpower. And my process right now is developing the superpower of being a good listener. So I've been listening and enjoying it, and how I implement that in my life, and how all of you who are listening to us implement it in your life. We can wave our magic wands, know your passions, and I'm listening here because I want to learn. And that's what I'm doing with it right now, Rick. That's
awesome. I'm going to go out a little bit on a limb, Patricia, and I think you're kind of taking a page from another very passionate person that has been a role model for probably a lot of people, when they say, be the change you want to see in the world. Yeah. And I think you're subtly saying that there are certain ways that people can behave with each other. And listening is an extremely important one of those ways to interact, and can be, in many ways, enable a lot of things. So thank you for that, Patricia. Okay, last up, Anita. You have your magic wand.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll take a different take. If I had a magic wand that was so magic, it could do things that could not be done without magic, like not in the physical world. Especially, there were some stupid decisions that NASA people made, in one particularly in the 1990s, and another one in the 20-aughts. And I would go back in time and reverse those stupid, idiotic, self-destructive decisions. And the space industry would be completely different right now.
That's a good one too.
That is a good, yep. Very interesting. It sounds like we could have another webinar on such decisions. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Anita. Okay, so we're going to change topics a little bit. We're going to focus a little bit more on diversity. Patricia Hines, as the Space Grant Director in New Mexico, and having served on many a diversity committee, is the perfect person to shed some light on this question. So, Patricia, what are you seeing as the most critical challenge we face in creating a more diverse work environment in the space industry at the moment?
Well, the critical issue is that we have to accept it exists. And I'm going to read a statement from the chair of the MIT faculty that is introducing a paper that was written in 1999 by the women at MIT, the scientists at MIT, who discovered that not only were they being ignored, they were being actively discriminated against. And the thing that they did to help clarify the problem was one of the ladies in this study, one of the female scientists, at night when nobody was around, went around and measured the lab space every single lab space in her building. And what she discovered, that women had 30% of the lab space in the building and men had the other 70%. That's one clear sign of a discriminatory practice that could be fixed. So the chair of the MIT faculty, when she brought the data to him, which is my second point, look at the data. He said, this report, and I've given Rick the link to this document. The document is called A Study on the Status of Women Faculty in Science at MIT, and this was written in 1999. This report on the work of the Committee on Women Faculty in the School of Science and the response of the dean to their finding describes a model that can be used by the Institute as a whole to decrease the inequities that still exist, both in terms of numbers and in treatment. And though these data refer to women, the methods used and recommendations made can and should be adapted by the faculty from underrepresented minority. The key conclusion that one gets from the report is that gender discrimination in the 1990s is subtle but pervasive and stems largely from unconscious ways of thinking that have been socialized into all of us, men and women alike. And what he's saying is, this exists, it's real. These women have proven to me, to us, it's real. So the first thing that, in terms of discriminatory practices, is accept they're real. And discrimination against women, discrimination against minorities, people of color. How many different ways do we need to demonstrate that these types of things exist? Because we do selection, we just prioritize and we select. So the next step is look at the data. So you can, accept that it exists, then you have to go to the next step. What's the data? So I decided just to show you some NASA data, not to pick on NASA. However, the number of male astronauts. Great. I have my notes. Oh, here we go. 11.5% of the NASA workforce is female. That's a pinch low, wouldn't you say? 90% of astronauts are male. And this is kind of a joke question. How many EVA suits fit women? None. They're working on it. But those kinds of unconscious bias manifest in ways that are embarrassing to NASA. When first women were going to do a joint EVA and they discovered none of the spacesuits fit them. And nobody even tried on any of the EVA suits before the mission. That's who's in charge of that kind of thinking. So you got to, those are, and then the third suggestion is men talk to women. So we've heard the women in this call, for example, that form groups of women to act on problems. Anita, Rosina, Hannah, you have your magic wands, that passion you cannot live unless you go to the Space Settlement Design every year. That's a person to talk to. If there's a woman in leadership in your community like Brownsville, let's say there's a woman president of the bank, go talk to her. If you have a job, how do we fix that 11% of the workforce at NASA is women? You have a woman who's leading a bank and you have a position that is open and you've called that woman and you've made a relationship with that woman, tell her, look, I got this position. Men do this all the time. That's no big deal. They call each other and say, hey, listen, you have anybody in mind? I'm going to send you this job description. You can do that. That woman works at a bank or the head of the Chamber of Commerce. Look at the women that you know that are in leadership positions that do hiring, not just HR people. And hey, I got this job. I really would like to support women and minorities in our community. I'm going to send you the job description. Do you think you might be able to, a couple of people you might be able to forward it to? And it begins the relationship building of, it's an incremental process. It's going to be one conversation at a time, one person at a time. It's not going to be this, all of a sudden everybody's going to wake up one morning and start hiring women or minorities, or all the police are going to quit shooting people. That's going to take time. We have to look at behavior, and you can measure behavior. You can measure the people that Hannah has involved in the space industry. You can measure her behavior, blah, 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 but behavior you can measure. Data you got. That's it.
Thank you, Patricia. No, that's the takeaways there, of course, are awareness. Awareness is the number one important thing, and being proactive. And as we can try to change the current environment. I want to, I guess, now that we're thinking about this, thinking about diversity, I want to ask another question that's very much related to this. I know that talking about data, it has been shown that more diverse teams are more successful. And there's data to show this in entrepreneur literature and so forth, that more diverse teams, diversity across the board, they tend to be more successful than less diverse teams. So the question I want to ask to the panel, and this will be to Anita and Hannah, in your opinion, what are the unique assets or perspectives that women bring to the space industry? Anita.
So Rick, it's interesting you said what you just said, because we knew what these questions were in advance. And my response to this question is, I have found in my career, over 40 years in the space business, that women and men think differently. And I wouldn't be able to quantify how women and men think differently, but I find that in building teams, and engineering works a lot, especially in the early design phases, you're working in teams to come up with concepts for how to solve problems. And having both women and men on teams, as you were indicating, Rick, having both women and men on teams together, working together, thinking differently together, makes those teams more effective, and they come out with better products. I wouldn't know what else to add beyond that. That's my experience.
Excellent, thank you. Hannah.
So I was thinking, which is not shocking, very, very similarly to Anita. And I think, again, it's a difficult thing to quantify, but it's an important question to ask. And so often, I think the question also needs to be directed, and we have to be very conscious in the space industry of asking that question and making sure to incorporate not just men and women, but every single minority, sexual orientation, religion, and kind of all of the other groups that have been traditionally left out of the aerospace industry. It's something that we growing need to be more and more conscious of. This is not just, it's also not just an American pursuit. This is an international effort. And when putting together teams, when making products, it's so important not to focus just on, what you look like and what you are getting out of the experience, but who's missing from the table.
Excellent. No, very, very important. And a lot of we've mentioned briefly some of this idea of unconscious bias, and trying to understand, of course, the how do you work together and so forth. And a lot of the way we do stuff stems from our education system, how we were brought up into this. And so the next question that I have this is going to be for Rosina and Anjali. The education system. How can the education system be improved to better prepare women and better prepare actually society in general to work together in a diverse atmosphere?
Sure. So I have two things. One, we've talked about raise awareness. We need to raise awareness of space. Let me give you a personal experience more recently. There was an academic internship that was posted at UC San Diego, and I acquired an intern. She was fantastic, and she had no idea what she was getting into. She had never heard of the idea of doing biology in space, or even sending an experiment to the International Space Station. She grew up in South Central LA. She was the first person to go to college. And she came away from this experience completely changed in terms of her direction. She wanted to pursue medicine. And now she's actually contemplating either a career in space or even becoming a flight surgeon. So just that one internship actually changed one person's complete trajectory in what she wants to do with her career. And I think we need to do more of that. We need to do more of this kind of raising awareness. One issue that I'm coming across more frequently is this idea of internships. They need to be paid. And I completely understand the debate, but there is value in academic internships when they're bounded and they're not taking advantage of the student, but providing that springboard. By providing them with meaningful work, it's a mutual relationship. She did some research for me online. The company benefited, but she also benefited a lot more. So it is about raising awareness within the university system, developing curriculum that is more focused on space. The second one is demystifying space. So space is still relatively closed off to industry. Space needs to become more of a normal curriculum as part of industry, as part of college, undergraduate, and graduate school. By that I mean not every person needs to go out and build a rocket, as others have mentioned. I think Rosina and even Hannah. Payloads. How do you fly something that's terrestrial? How do you take a terrestrial experiment, first translate it to orbital biology, and then what is the payload operations? That requires some very specific skills: project management, being able to talk to people, leadership skills, business skills, accounting skills. So this needs to be mapped. The space jobs and space careers need to be mapped to what people think as normal careers, and then create that route back into the space industry.
Well said.
Yeah. Very well thought out. Thank you for that.
Yes.
So Rosina, what are your thoughts on how the education system can be improved?
I have lots of thoughts. But so part of my master's thesis work actually involved studying the effects of gender on STEM performance in school, at the upper high school level and in undergraduate physics courses specifically. And on average, women are better students in STEM courses. And so to me, there needs to be a change in how we talk to women in those courses. And it needs to start not in college, but in elementary school and in middle school and in high school. There was a great / terrible commercial that came out several years ago. And it's a little girl and she's outside and it's like, oh, you're gonna get your dress dirty, or don't play with that, that's for boys, or look at this mess you made, when she's doing like a mobile of the solar system. And so by the time she's in high school, she sees a poster for the science fair and she looks at it and she just walks away. And that happens so often,
Yeah.
I think it's something like 60 to 70% of girls in elementary school and in middle school love science, all kinds of science and math. And but then by the time they get to high school and they're going to college, they're like, oh, it's too hard. Oh, I can't do it because I'm a girl. And that's the mentality that we really need to change, because you can do it. Your sex, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, your background doesn't matter. What matters is your passion for it. And if you care about it, then you should do it. So that's my opinion, that we need to change the attitudes in schools towards, and not, like I said, not just women, but to all underrepresented communities, that they are capable of doing these things.
Definitely. No, it's that unconscious bias piece that's happening again. And
sometimes it's a very conscious bias.
Sometimes, yeah. No, sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. And I think we were seeing that from the summer academy into the college programs, where we would have almost better sometimes than 50-50 representation. And then when you transition almost that same cohort into the college program, it would be 10% or 20%, if that. So no, it's definitely a real problem. As Patricia says, the numbers are there, the data is there. Now we just have to figure out what are the right modes to adjust this. So great thoughts, Rosina. Thank you so much. Now, I had sent out a whole list of questions to the panelists, and it was in part just to try to see how people were thinking. So I did have a little fun with that, to see which questions people gravitated to and so forth. This particular one actually was almost touched by the majority of the panel. There wasn't any other question that had so many responses on this one, except Anita. Which I thought was kind of interesting. I probably shouldn't say that, but it is kind of funny. So, Anita, you don't have to answer this one. But the question is, and it is a very serious question. I didn't mean to make light of it, but it is a serious question. And I have wrestled with this myself. Do you or did you ever feel imposter syndrome in or out of place? Sorry, what am I saying? Do you or did you ever feel imposter syndrome or out of place in your industry, and how did you overcome that? So, Patricia, thoughts on that?
Really? Okay, yes, of course. The imposter syndrome for me, a lot. And when I started the conference, the ISPCS conference in 2005, there was no such thing as commercial space in that time. And I started this conference. It was an X Prize Cup event. So I hope everybody knows that what the X Prize was, but essentially it was a competition based on the Ortigue Prize that Lindbergh won $25,000 when he flew across the Atlantic. Anusha Ansari, who is now the CEO of the X Prize Foundation, but at the time it was Peter Diamandis, put together this X Prize competition for a commercial company to build a launch vehicle and take humans to space and repeat the same feat within 2 weeks with the same vehicle. And the X Prize was won by Burt Rutan. And in the meantime, Diamandis established, what are we going to do when somebody wins the X Prize? And they came up with the X Prize Cup, and the state of New Mexico competed and won the opportunity to host the X Prize in Cup in New Mexico in 2005. ISPCS was an X Prize Cup event. So the people that came to the X Prize Cup event, the ISPCS, were these giants in the industry. Did I ever feel like an imposter in that meeting? I'll tell you, I was the co-chair of the meeting, the co-founder, and the founder of the X Prize Cup was Bill Gavis and myself. And I felt like this was the most uncomfortable thing I had done. But in fact, we did it. And then at the end of the day, after all of this, all of these people in limousines and Buzz Aldrin and all, we all finished the reception we had, and Bill Gobbets came to me and said, Pat, next year we need to have a banquet. Next year? What do you mean next year? Oh man, I'm gonna have to get therapy. Next year. Being an imposter is gonna happen to all of us. You're gonna be asked, you're gonna be called on, and you're just gonna have to show up and do your best.
Awesome. No, great story. Great story. Rosina.
Yeah, I'm gonna add on to that. You know, we all experience imposter syndrome. I still do to this day. I'm pretty sure I was complaining about it about a month ago. And I think what has really helped me work past that is knowing that I'm not alone and I'm not the only one who feels that way. And while women and minorities and other underrepresented communities experience it at a disproportionate rate, the thing is like, you just have to tell yourself that you do belong. All of your accomplishments are accomplishments, and you should be proud of them, and you stand on your accomplishments. You earn your place to be where you are. And so you just have to tell yourself, like, I deserve to be here. I may feel like I don't, but I do.
Oh, fantastic. Great word. Great word. Anjali.
Yeah, I have to echo everyone else here. You know, even after all the schooling, all the experience, you know, work experience, as well as the educational experience, you feel like, you know, it's like that that Talking Heads song, right? I mean, that song is about something else, but really it's, you know, how did I get here? What am I doing something wrong? What am I doing right? So one thing that has helped me over the years is a quote by Steve Jobs, and I actually have it in front of me. I was watching 60 Minutes and I heard it there. The quote goes something like this: everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again. That has helped me. I remind myself of that. You know, anyone can do anything they want if they have passion. And, you know, both Anita and Pat are spot on. Gotta have passion. And then to echo what Rosina just said, you and I belong here in the space industry just as much as the next person. Yeah. So, you know, we're just starting to explore that final frontier. There's a lot of space in space for everyone. So,
thank you. Well done. Well said. Yeah. Hannah.
Yeah, I feel it quite regularly. I am often the youngest person in the room, no matter what scenario it is. At work, always the youngest person in the meeting. In all of the outside of work things, I'm always the youngest person there, unless we're actually working with students. At that point, they beat me, but not by many years. So it's very, very easy to fall into that trap of, am I supposed to be here? Did I just fake my way here on accident? But kind of in those moments, and going through it, I've leaned a lot on my mentors and the people who have watched and helped me get here to just kind of reground me and be like, hey, you're here for a reason. These are all of the reasons, or these are all the things that you've done that people keep pulling you along. Anita keeps pulling me along because you're actually qualified. And you may have less experience than other people around, but you still have the qualifications required and necessary to be here. And there is no doubt about that in our minds. So finding that mentor and mentors in all different contexts. Not all of mine are in the aerospace industry. Not all of mine are professional. Some of them are high school teachers that I had growing up, and kind of still reaching back out to them and being like, look how far you've come, and look how far and how many more adventures you have yet to come. And kind of just putting yourself in that mindset, back in that space of like, okay, yes, it's been a journey. I still have a journey ahead, but I'm here for a reason.
No, fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you for that. And thank you everyone for the insights. I will also say that yes, I have in many cases suffered imposter syndrome, and had to. I guess the thing that has helped me in the past is talking to all my colleagues, many of which are on this panel today. It's just being part of the community definitely helps in many ways. Well, excellent. Thank you, everyone, for sharing all of that. Anita, did you want to add anything? I didn't mean to leave you out of that, but no, that's...
actually, because of my vintage, had I had imposter syndrome, and it would have been reinforced. For instance, in high school, I didn't tell my high school counselors that I planned to be an engineer because I know they would have discouraged me. So I basically just had to bull my way through it and just not admit there was any other path than the one I chose.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so we're coming towards the end here, and want to wrap up basically by let's give some advice. So what advice would you give to young women who want to pursue a career in space? Consider both those that are trying to choose a major and consider the recent graduates. So Anita, why don't you start?
All right. So my advice is actually for everyone, not just women. And there is a $1 trillion space economy out there. It is going to happen. We are seeing the beginnings of it right now. There will be places for companies. In fact, there will be activities by companies that we don't think of as space companies. In fact, we have had people talking at National Space Society conferences from Procter & Gamble and Royal Caribbean. Royal Caribbean is looking at cruise ships in space. Wow, how much fun would that be? Procter & Gamble knows that wherever people go, they need to be clean and have clean stuff. You have Procter & Gamble products in your house. They have names like Tide and Cascade and what's this soap? Safeguard, I guess. And you have, and P&G will have to go wherever people go just to keep us sanitary. So I'd say no matter what your passion is, if you're in a skill that involves people, that skill will be needed in space. Keep an eye on what's going on in the space business. Here, join the National Space Society, and we do keep track of the pulse of what's going on over the horizon in space. Our magazine is an award-winning magazine that will talk about what's coming along. At our conferences, you'll get to meet people who are actually making it happen. And as I said, we've had people from industries that you don't normally think of as space industry. So National Space Society it's actually an advocate organization, but a lot of us engineers are infiltrating it. And our aim is to keep people informed about what is happening in space now that will make the kind of space economy happen that we want to happen, which is people living in space.
Excellent. Awesome. Patricia, what advice would you give to people that want to get into the space industry?
Well, now, to quote Anita, my vintage, I ask if they want advice first. Because I could rattle on and they're like, hey, I don't want to be impolite. But second thing I want to say here is, Anjali said this best. For somebody who put a meeting together, I hate meetings. Shoot me if I have to go to another meeting. So I created a meeting that I wanted to go to. So depending on who you are, the advice that you gave was go to space meetings because you will meet people. I don't like meetings with a cast of thousands. It's overwhelming. And I want to know that somebody I speak to wants to speak to me. And that's hard to do when you're in a meeting with thousands of people. It's ridiculous. Because, there's people who go to meetings to go to find the most important person. And I don't want to talk to that person. I know that. They don't want to talk to me. I know that. So maybe they do, but they don't know it yet. When you go to meetings, think about who you are. I put a meeting together. Anjali went to it. Rick went to it. No more than 150 people. Because over 2 days, you can meet half of the people in that room. And the talks were all in one room in my meeting. So you're not racing around trying to figure out. My meeting was so hard to get to that people didn't do their talk and leave and go play golf. Like you hear a talk and that person's disappeared. And you want to go talk to them, but they're gone. You can't find them. So there's these meetings where there's room for the special people, and then all the rest of the people that are paying to get into the meeting, none of the speakers are around. So my meeting, the speakers couldn't leave either. You come to New Mexico, you got to be dedicated. You got to want to be there. And you're not going to be able to leave and take your limo back to the office. You're going to be there. So I have a picture of people like Bill Gerstenmaier, a couple of astronauts, Wayne Hale, Buzz Aldrin, sitting at lunch together. And people could just sit down right next to them because we ate, everybody ate together. Everybody did everything together. If you paid for registration, you got access to everything. Except the party at my house. That was by invitation. So, you know, I got a big house, but not that big. So anyway, you get what I'm saying. Bob Bigelow loved my meeting. If you've ever met Bob Bigelow, how many of y'all have? See? Bob Bigelow came to my meeting and he had a booth and he was standing at, this is a billionaire. He's standing at my booth handing out his bags. Here, you need one of these bags. That's Bigelow Aerospace. Have you ever? He had a ball at the meeting, and it was because he got to talk to people. And so think about this. This is advice for those of us who are professionals. Think about the meeting you're going to and who you are, and make sure there's a fit there.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Thank you for that, Patricia. Anjali.
Yes. So what advice would I give to young women who want to pursue a career in space? First and foremost, start with what you are passionate about. Figure out what you really enjoy doing. How do you do that? Well, one way to do that is start a journal and start tracking things that you really get lost in, that you're in the zone, you forget about time, and you're really just focused on what you're doing. This can be art, this can be a project, this can be even creating an Excel spreadsheet. I'm guilty of that. I love, creating spreadsheets. Any new language is going to be hard. So if you really want to go into engineering or math or science, and that's not your forte, don't shy away from it. It's like learning a new language. Science for me was a new language until I really learned to practice it. And then it got easier over time. So find that passion. And then once you do, broaden your scope of thinking, meaning that if you're an artist, you don't have to go and do art. Think about applying it to space from a different perspective. For example, I'm looking for a graphic designer and illustrator right now. I would love to find somebody who understands their art from a foundational level, but then can apply it to like a marketing brochure or whatnot. In the next 5 years, we're going to be back on the moon. We're going to have a space station in orbit. We are going to lower the cost of flying to orbit. There's a lot happening. The final piece of advice that I want to just give here is that approach your career as a designer or an architect. You are in control. You get to design your life. Just always think about your life from a design perspective. And it's not like you're designing it and that's it. It's an evolution. Keep editing your life as you move through. So first year you decide to be a math major, then you decide, oh, maybe math, not math, maybe engineering, or maybe you want to be a graphic designer. That's okay. And the final thing is that go read a bunch of job descriptions. Start looking at companies, read a bunch of job descriptions, and then design your own. Write your own job description. So then by the time that you're done with college or you're looking for a job, you've identified what's important to you, and then you can try to map that to your future career. That's all.
Fantastic. Very, very good advice. Reminds me of a good friend of mine who says, don't be afraid to reinvent your life and to reinvent yourself every so often. So excellent. Excellent. So next up, Rosina.
My advice is twofold. And it's based very much on my own experiences. You need to be your own biggest supporter and advocate. And you need to surround yourself with people who will do the same. And this applies to any field you choose, because people are going to tell you that you can't do it. People who you love and who should support you are going to tell you that you're not good enough and you can't cut it. And so your inner voice has to be stronger than what other people are going to tell you. And what I've learned, if you surround yourself with people, with good mentors, good role models, friends, family, who believe in you, no matter what your choices are, then you're going to be able to succeed. You can do it without that support, without that foundation, but it's a lot harder. And it took me many, many years to build up my own inner voice to support myself, and accomplish what I have accomplished. So.
No, very, very important and great words. Great words of advice. Thank you. Thank you, Rosina. Last off, Hannah.
So I feel like I can't quite give advice to recent graduates, because I'm still definitely figuring it out. However, what's working for me, and what has worked for me without a doubt kind of throughout this whole journey, is finding and leaning into a community. So especially in space, there's dozens of different subgroups, committees, and organizations, whether they are nonprofits or professional organizations or just groups of enthusiasts all throughout the world. So finding that community that is in the relentless pursuit of space together. It's very easy to kind of get lost and discouraged when you think you're the only one pursuing this dream. But if you have kind of those regular conversations and regular communication with other people who are daring to dream as large as you are, it makes making the dream happen that much easier. So finding a mentor in the community is awesome. And finding a mentor that looks like you and represents you has been huge and has made a significant impact in my career and how I got here. So seeking out kind of those mentorship communities, mentorship opportunities, and then building up a community around you that's seeking out and wants to accomplish the same thing. You're not in this alone. There are hundreds and thousands of young individuals in the United States, in Texas, in South Texas, that all are watching kind of this evolution happen and want to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. Fantastic. I have to say there was an awful lot here, everyone. Normally I'd be taking notes left and right, but I'm also moderating. So I'm just glad that this is recorded so I can go back and capture all the pearls of wisdom that have been discussed here today. There is definitely a lot was covered, and a lot has been said, a lot of important things for all of us to go back and make sure we internalize in many ways. I know I'm definitely going to do that. But before we go, I want to have one quick wrap-up question. It's really, really fast, and I want everyone to pick a year, and then we can celebrate. We'll have a party when this actually happens. But everyone pick a year. When will NASA land the first woman on the moon? Anita.
As optimistic as I am about space, I'm pessimistic because of who's involved in their track record. So the year I pick is 2028.
Okay, 2028. Patricia.
I thought about this question, and first I want to say thank you Thank you. Rick, thank you. I would say, and I hope I'm still alive, 2035.
2035. Well, we all hope you're going to still be alive, and when it happens, we're going to have the party. Anjali.
Yeah, I was thinking the same as Anita. 2028.
Okay, Rosina.
I was thinking 2030, so same time frame.
Okay, Hannah.
Right. I'll be the relentless optimist. 2026. Take it.
Okay. Okay.
We need one.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, it's interesting that nobody chose, I guess, the date that they were trying to shoot for, 2024. So we have a lot of, we're all realists in one way or another. So excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And I want to thank all of the panelists today for amazingly insightful discussions. As I said before, I'm going to be looking back over everything and taking notes. This was the third edition of the NewSpace City Brownsville's Commercial Space webinar series. Keep an eye out for our next edition in the next quarter. If you're interested in more information about how you can be a part of the growing commercial space ecosystem, please go visit our website. Again, it's www.expandingfrontiers.org, and sign up for our newsletter. At Expanding Frontiers, we have several exciting programs, including the Entrepreneur in Residence Apprenticeship Program for aspiring space entrepreneurs, as well as the Space Entrepreneurship Summer Academy and the Space Settlement Design Tournament, two unique opportunities for high school students to immerse themselves in the space industry. Looking forward to our next webinar. Until then, laugh often, dream big, and reach for the stars.